Ready, Gerardo.
¿Ya? ¿Listos?
Yes.
Ok. Pues vamos a comenzar entonces. Buenos días a todas, buenos días a todos. Tenemos hoy una sesión muy interesante de seminario de nuevos datos y métodos para la generación de información oficial. Y voy a cambiar a inglés para presentar a nuestro invitado, que pues es el señor António Rua. Welcome everybody to this session, very interesting session of our seminar on new data and methods for generating official information. We have a very interesting and expert guest, Mr. António Rua, who is going to give us a presentation named Tracking Economic Activity Daily During the Lockdown. I will introduce him with a brief bio. António Rua is a senior economist in the Economics and Research Department of the Portuguese Central Bank, Banco de Portugal. He is also associate professor at Nova School of Business and Economics, Portugal. His major fields of expertise are time series econometrics and quantitative macroeconomics, with particular emphasis on forecasting and empirical macro and finance. He holds a PhD from the Technical University of Lisbon, a Master of Science, and a bachelor degree from the University of Nova de Lisboa, Portugal. And Antonio is going to talk about something that is very, very interesting, which is this way of measuring economic activity with very high frequency. How high is the frequency? Well, daily. And this is very interesting and very surprising. And of course, this is something that could not have been done just a few years ago, but that now we can implement given the existence and the availability of a new range of time series that are daily and that can be put together in order to improve our assessment of how is the economy faring. And in a situation like the current one, in which the world economy just was shocked by the coronavirus pandemic and its macroeconomic consequences, having this capability of following daily what is going on and building indicators that can give us a very timely glance of what the traditional economic indicators will tell us months or weeks later is a very valuable improvement. And so I think this is a quite interesting line of work. As many of you in the public may know, INEGI has started using nowcasting methods to improve the timeliness of the release of key economic indicators. And this approach that António Rua will show us is a very interesting way to go in this direction of exploiting the power of high frequency and very timely economic indicators from alternative sources. So once that's been said, I will please ask Antonio to give us his presentation. He will have 25 minutes for doing that, and then we will have 30 minutes for discussion. Antonio, the floor is yours. Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me share the screen. I need you to enable the option of sharing the screen. Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you. First of all, I would like to thank for the invitation, of course, and for the kind introductory words. The talk today is about a work that we have conducted a few months ago at the bank. This is a joint work with a colleague of mine there at the bank. You know, when the pandemics hit the economy, everybody wants to know what was happening to the economy. And what we think now of relatively high frequency indicators like monthly indicators like industrial production and so on, which are available typically on a monthly basis. Those indicators were not enough to provide a picture of what was going on the economy. So there was a need to develop very high frequency indicators so that one could assess the impact in real time and in a timely manner of COVID-19. So this work developed a few months ago was a bit of a race against time, precisely because of that, because we wanted very quickly to have a tool in our toolkit so that we could assess how the economy was evolving. As you all know, COVID-19 hit the world, so there was these major disruptions in all economies. So this is not a specific shock to a given economy. This was a worldwide phenomenon. Of course, this kind of shock led to substantial changes in the economies. There were countries where there was a lockdown. You know, there were all sorts of measures being taken during the pandemics. So resorting to what we now call somehow the traditional statistics like quarterly national accounts or even monthly indicators like industrial production or retail sales was not really enough to have a picture of the economy. You know, even, you know, you have the frequency, which is in some cases monthly, but even for those indicators, you have to wait, for example, around 1 month or 45 days to know what happened in that specific month. So you needed to have a kind of tool that could allow you to assess what was going on in a very timely and efficient manner. So, of course, this led the researchers and to focus on what we now call non-traditional sources of data, so that one could assess in a high-frequency basis what's going on. You know, I would like just to mention a couple of work that has been developed elsewhere. You know, I think the first to release this type of high-frequency indicator was Louis Mertens and Jim Stock at the US. And, you know, of course, there are some good reasons why they were the first. I would say the immediate reason was that they had the data. So you know, it's not by chance that for the US you have lots of data and you have very high frequency data. So you know, it's a country where it enables you to do that kind of stuff. So they were the first to compile this sort of indicator. And basically what they proposed was a weekly economic indicator based on 10 weekly series. Then I would also like to mention the case of the Bundesbank, so the German central bank. I think weeks after, they also released this weekly activity indicator based on, in particular, on 7 high-frequency indicators, on 7 weekly indicators, and they are still working on that. So there is still work on progress. Of course, there other countries, there are other central banks, there are other international institutions working on this currently. So this is not this is not specific to a given country. There is a lot of people now looking at this kind of data and trying to compile these high frequency indicators. In our case, we try to go a bit further, and we try to compile not a weekly indicator, but a daily indicator. So you'll see why, but we thought, why should we stick with weekly data? Let's try to do on a daily basis. And so we developed this daily economic indicator, the so-called day. Of course, to develop this kind of high frequency indicators, you need to resort to these non-conventional data sources. Of course, now it seems kind of surprising, these non-conventional data sources, how they can be useful. But in practice, you have already relatively, there is already a strand of literature highlighting the importance of these types of data. For example, I would like to mention, for example, card-based payments and ATM cash withdrawals. This is the kind of data that's given its scope, it can be really encompassing in terms of the transactions that are captured by this kind of data. And there are already several applications for several countries, including for Portugal. I worked a few years ago on nowcasting private consumption and using this kind of data with very interesting results. So this is the kind of data that can be very promising when you want to compile a high frequency indicator. Other blocks of data could be also related with transportation activities, like road traffic. Now you have these indicators looking at road traffic, but in fact, you have already some papers in the past highlighting how this type of data could also be useful to track economic developments. I would also like to highlight the block of information related with energy consumption, in particular electricity consumption. Typically this kind of data is available on a relatively high frequency, and again, there is already out there good examples of how this data can also be useful to track current economic conditions. And of course, what you can do for a given country is really conditional on the data that you have for that country. You cannot do omelets without eggs. So you need the experience that you have across countries is not the same, because of course the type of data that you have available at the high frequency level for each country is not the same across countries. So there is not one size fits all. So for a specific country, you should try to exploit the information that you have. And having said that, for Portugal, and we spent a bit of time trying to collect this daily economic time series, as you may imagine, when the pandemics hit the economies, there are all sorts of indicators, high frequency indicators falling. So it wouldn't be hard to find indicators that fell during when COVID-19 hit the economies. But here the point is, you should, and this is really important, you should try to collect this data for a relatively long sample period, for a minimal sample period, so that you can perform some in-sample analysis before COVID-19 hit economies, so that you can be more comfortable that this kind of data will also be helpful to track a recovery. So try to avoid getting some spurious results if you focus on a very narrow time period. If you just focus on the relatively recent period where COVID-19 hit economies, then you may end up getting the impression that some types of data are really useful, but maybe they aren't. So it's really important to collect, a minimal sample period so that you can perform a relatively robust statistical analysis of the information content of this kind of data. Having said that, we were able to collect data on daily traffic intensity, which basically corresponds to the number of vehicles passing through tolls, adjusted for the number of miles traveled, because the highways have different length. So we wanted to also take that into account. We could get information for both for total traffic intensity, but also the split between heavy commercial vehicles and light passenger vehicles. And we were able to consider that data since 2012. Regarding also on transport activity, we were able to collect data on the movement of passengers at national airports, the number of aircrafts landed, as well as cargo shipments. So we were also able to collect this kind of data. On top of that, we also got information on electricity consumption, both the aggregate as well as across different distribution grids. We also collected data on natural gas consumption. So again, energy consumption. And as I mentioned before, and I think this is the kind of thing that is really promising. This is a really promising data source. Is card-based payments and ATM cash withdrawals. And we were also able to collect this kind of data for the Portuguese economy for a relatively long time span. So, this was the kind of data that we were able to collect. And, this amounted to around, I think it was 25 daily economic time series, which was a good starting point. Okay, so let me go through the approach, the econometric approach that we pursued to deal with this kind of data. The first thing is typically this kind of data. When you look at the daily time series, you typically see very strong seasonal patterns. Okay, so there are several. When you look at monthly or quarterly data, typically, the National Statistics Office releases this type of data already seasonally adjusted, so that's very nice. But when you get this raw data, this daily raw economic data, when you look at the data, you clearly see strong seasonal patterns. But there is one issue here. The problem is an empirical one, which is typically you don't have long time periods for this kind of data. At least when you think of the time span that you usually have for monthly or quarterly data. So that means that it's going to be really hard to clean out the seasonal patterns. For example, the annual seasonal patterns, because if you don't have many years of data, then it's going to be really hard to clean the daily data from those annual seasonal patterns. So, we had to be a bit pragmatic here. Well, and we followed, the US case basically. So we considered year-on-year growth rates. So, this is the kind of transformation that you can do to the data, which is, easily interpretable. You can explain it very easily to a policymaker. You are basically comparing, this year vis-a-vis the same day in the previous year. So, it's relatively easy to explain and allows to clean slowly moving annual seasonality. And that's what, Lewis, Mertens, and Stock have done for the US. And I think it's a way of overcoming this issue of the strong seasonal patterns without having many years of data. Of course, that's not the end of the story. Even if you are comparing the same day this year with the same day in the previous year, there are effects that still are present in the daily data. And one of those effects is precisely the weekday. So the day of the week differs this year vis-a-vis the previous year. So you may comparing the same date, but the day of the week is different, and that can be really important. If you think, for example, regarding the behavior of variables, for example, when you compare during the weekend and vis-a-vis during a working day, for many time series, you see different you see different behavior depending if you are looking at the weekend or at the a working day. So one should take that into account. And to clean the effect, the day of the week effect, we resorted to this seasonal trend decomposition method, which was developed in the 90s, which is not as popular as X11, for example, method typically used in National Statistics Office, but has several important advantages in this particular case. And one of those advantages is precisely it can handle any type of seasonality. Typically, X11 method typically only allows you to clean monthly or quarterly data. And this method in particular, this non-parametric method, this is a non-parametric method, which is also an advantage, is able to clean also other types of seasonality, in particular the one that we were interested in, which is the intra-weekly seasonality. That is the day of the week effect. It also has this nice feature that it allows the seasonal component to evolve over time. It can be specified to be robust to outliers, which is also nice because this daily data is full of strange values. And although conceptually the method was developed for an additive decomposition, if you consider the log of those variables, which is really common, then you get a multiplicative decomposition, which is a little more standard when you think of seasonal adjustments. So even that you can easily overcome. But even if you control for the day of the week, there are still effects that still persist in the series. For example, you have moving holidays. For example, Easter or Carnival, do not always fall on the same date. So if you are comparing, a given day today with the same date in the previous year, Easter is not always in the same date. So you should also take that into account because that will change, that will impact your economic series. And for that, we resorted to this, in the spirit of recurrir, so this regression, taking into account these effects to capture these moving holiday effects. Once we clean as far as we could the daily series from these recurrent effects, we basically estimated a factor model. In the spirit of the previous work, Lewis, Martins, and Stock for the US have done the same thing. For Germany, it's basically applied the same thing. So we estimated a factor model. So we took the daily series and we extracted this common factor. It's this common factor which is our economic indicator. Okay, so as I was mentioned, we had these blocks of information, 25 series. Of course, they are organized by blocks of information. So we wanted to be parsimonious in the sense that we didn't want to overweight too much a given block of data. So we tried to, to pick or at least have some balance in terms of the series that were being included in the final composite indicator. So we took a very parsimonious approach. Now, of course, it's very, and I also do this kind of work, using factor models, using hundreds of series. But we should bear in mind, that, for example, Stock and Watson in the late 80s, early 90s, they proposed an indicator for the US using just 4 series. So just 4 monthly series, and it worked really well for many years. So taking on board more information can be useful, but now if you need to be parsimonious, you can also get a good result if you do it, I would say, properly. Of course, we also, besides having a parsimonious approach in terms of the variables to be included, we also performed a preliminary analysis in the sense that we wanted to take on board those series that had more information content regarding economic activity. So we compared basically each series with the variable that we were interested in this case, the year-on-year GDP growth. And for this kind of pre-selection, it's really important to have a relatively, to have a minimal sample period so that you can be relatively confident that you are picking the right variables. So we ended up with 5 daily series. So road traffic of heavy commercial vehicles, electricity consumption, natural gas consumption, cargo and mail landed, and card-based payments. Let me just go through some of the steps. So as I mentioned previously, so the first thing is you take the daily series, and in our case, those 5 daily series. And first we want to extract or to clean the intra-weekly seasonality. Just hopefully you are seeing my mouse pointer. So if you are, please let me know. Are you seeing my mouse pointer?
Yes, we can see
it. Okay, great. So let me, I have a figure for each of the series, but I won't go through all the series, of course, I don't have time. But, take, for example, the case of road traffic. This is road traffic, and here you have the seasonal factor for road traffic and the seasonal factor for each day of the week. So this is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So what you can see here is the following. For example, on Sundays, road traffic of heavy commercial vehicles is 90% less than on an average day. And on Saturdays is around 60%. And of course, during the working days, it's a bit higher than on an average day. So you can see that there is this strong seasonal pattern where, the day of the week clearly affects the behavior of the daily series. And you want to clean these recurrent effects. So that's what we do. Of course, the pattern is not the same across all series. For example, card-based payments, you can see, for example, that on Sundays you have less card-based payments, but it's precisely on Friday and on Saturday that you have, higher card-based payments. So the profile may change, the seasonal pattern may change across series, okay? Let me continue. Okay, then, as I mentioned, we wanted to clean out the effects of moving holidays, for example, Carnival and Easter. For example, take, for example, the case of Easter, okay? So again, take the example of road traffic. Here is Easter. So we have here the Good Friday, Saturday, Easter Sunday, Monday. So you basically see, and this is the effect that Easter has on the daily time series. And you can see, for example, on the Good Friday, road traffic is around 90% less than on a typical day. And you see that on Saturdays is still also below what would be on a regular day, and still on Sunday, and still on Monday. Okay, so you can see. So the black line is the estimate of the impact, and the shaded area is the confidence band. So you clearly can see that there is a strong statistical significant effect coming out from these moving holidays that you should take into account, that are not cleaned when you look at year-on-year growth rates. Okay. So we also clean this. We also clean this the daily time series from these moving holiday effects. Then we took those 5 daily time series and we extracted the single factor from those 5 series. And if you are familiar with this kind of factor model literature, when you extract these single factors, these latent variables don't have a meaningful scale, so you need to put a meaningful scale. So in this chart, what I plot here is the single factor, which is called we call it the daily economic indicator, rescaled to the mean and standard deviation of GDP year-on-year growth. Okay, and you see this is the daily time series. The gray line. Okay, you see it's a bit erratic. There are some irregular movements. It's really hard to clean the daily time series from all the effects, and there is of course irregularity affecting daily time series. The green line is the centered weekly average of the daily time series. So it's still a daily time series, but it's the weekly moving average of the daily time series. And if you do that, you already see that it brings a lot these, you know, a bit these irregular movements, but you still get this daily time series, okay? And here I have the GDP year-on-year growth rate. You know, this was for the fourth quarter, and this was for the second quarter. And you know what you can see. Of course, you're not familiar with, you know, with the latest developments in the Portuguese economy. And I don't want also to go too much in that, but I want to stress the following: you have this big, and this, you know, this huge decrease, and this happened in a couple of days. And this was exactly when we had the lockdown in the Portuguese economy, when we had the emergency state declared on March 18. So you see that there was this huge drop in economic activity, and the indicator was pointing out to to decreases of or declines of around 15 up to 20%, and we're a bit worried about this because at the time we finished doing the indicator, we had no estimate for GDP year-on-year growth rate for the second quarter, and when it was released, it was around 16%. So it was really the average of the 90 days of the daily indicator was right on the spot in terms of the estimate that was afterwards released by the National Statistics Office. So yeah, we were satisfied that we could capture these quite rapid changes in the economy and still have something that on quarterly terms captures the variable of interest. Then I don't have much time. I will try to be really brief here, but we were a bit more besides obviously of interpreting the chart. We also conducted some regressions. This is basically to show that in a regression contest, the daily economic indicator, whether you put it on a quarterly terms or whether you consider the daily time series, and for that you have to consider these mixed frequency models. But whether you consider it on a quarterly basis or its daily counterpart, you find that this indicator has strong information content regarding nowcasting GDP year-on-year growth rate. Some concluding remarks to wrap up. So you can find more details. I had to skip, of course, some of the technical details here, but you can find much more discussion in the working paper that has been already released. We released the working paper at the end of July. So you have here the reference and the link. I would like to just conclude saying the following. The use of this high-frequency data has been reinforced, as we all know, during the pandemics, and everybody wants to know what's happening to the economies, and it has proven to be useful during the pandemics. Of course, taking on board this kind of data into analysis is not straightforward, as you can see, because there are all sorts of things that you should be aware of when you consider daily data, which typically you don't really care about, or you don't have to worry about when you consider monthly or quarterly data. So there are several things that are specific of considering daily data, and that's not easy. Something that I felt when I was developing this, and still do, of course, is that there is a lot of room to improve on data collection. Most of this data is owned by private firms, and sometimes it's really hard to get the data from those firms, at least at this high frequency data, and convincing them to provide relatively long time series. Of course, if you want these high frequency indicators, you also have to make you have to be aware that you should be able to compute them in a timely manner. So you don't want the daily indicator if you know that you will only be able to update that daily economic indicator 2 months after the day. So it's not really that useful if you are only able to do that with that time lag. Of course, again, relying on this high frequency data poses challenges to empirical work. I mentioned some. So, this is a bit of a headache. You should be careful, taking on board this kind of data. Of course, there is also the risk of overinterpretation. I would mention the following. First, you don't want to comment, the evolution from one day to another. It's, that this kind of indicators can be affected by irregular movements. So you don't want to overinterpret too much these indicators, at that frequency. But you can, for example, look at a daily, weekly average. Of course, there are, again, all sorts of indicators there. For example, those Google mobility indices and stuff like that. It can be really useful. But again, be aware that you should try to assess if those indicators were also are also useful to track economic conditions in the past. Because in the sense, for example, maybe even if people are not getting or not going to the shops nowadays, or they are doing remote working or whatever, and so maybe you have less traffic, but they are still spending. So you should be careful. You should be careful on the way you interpret this kind of data. So there are lots of data there, potentially high frequency data, but you should be careful that eventually they are capturing only small pieces of the economy. And I will end up basically quoting Halvarian. So he's the chief economist at Google, and he was recently asked whether he expects to see more widespread use of this high frequency data. And he said, absolutely, we've got to look at the windshield, not the rear view mirror. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Antonio. We just used that allegory of the rear view mirror in a paper we published recently, just to stress the importance of using timely data and high frequency data for improving the timeliness of the analysis of the economists. And well, I have a number of questions for you and comments, and please you choose which of these you want to answer. I want to say something in Spanish a todo el público, que por favor pongan sus preguntas en el chat para que de ahí vayamos eligiendo algunas para mostrarlas, planteárselas al expositor en la medida de que tengamos tiempo para ese intercambio. I will switch to English again, and so I will want to ask you a number of things. One is first the reaction that you perceived in the potential users of this information, for example, the economists at the Portugal Central Bank. So how was that reaction? Did they receive it well, and are they using it, and are they considering this kind of improvement important, or are they skeptical about these methods? And the other thing I want to ask you is, you presented this regression against GDP, and this give us turns we to the idea of taking the GDP as a reference. But you can build a new kind of economic indicator that is not properly GDP, but is something similar, but with a higher frequency. Have you considered kind of using that on its own value with dependence of GDP? And one other thing that I want to ask you is about the dependence on different providers, at times private sources which own the data that you need to do what you are doing, and any consideration about the risk of depending on that kind of sources, which suddenly can just decide that they will not continue supplying the information you need to do this. And one other question is about the possible trade-offs between the availability of series, perhaps a lower number of series that statistical economic series that you can use with very high frequency, compared with the number of series and perhaps the relevance of the series that you can use with perhaps lower frequency, weekly, for example. And how do you manage this trade-off? I mean, I see it's quite interesting to have this daily index, but will you perhaps have a more meaningful index if you use lower frequency series? And one other question is about the criteria for selecting the series. And you mentioned Stock and Watson and this parsimonious approach for building this index, this composite indicator. But would you rather have a slightly higher number of indicators? How do you manage this balance of having perhaps a small number of indicators or against a slightly higher number of indicators, which may improve the explanatory power of your series? And well, these are my questions and comments, and I want to congratulate you for your very interesting job and your paper. And please choose which of these things you want to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to answer all the questions, of course. They are really good questions. I hope to have time to answer to all the questions. I will take the first one, the reaction. You know, people were eager to have high frequency indicators given, you know, the abrupt changes that were happening in the economy. So too much eager for my taste, I would say. You know, I always take this humble attitude towards methods and models. I don't believe that there is, you know, a model that is the best in every and single way. So I think, you know, all models, or, you know, models may have specific advantages vis-a-vis other models. It can be useful in particular cases. No, so I think it's always nice to have these things in our toolkit, and having more tools, like, you know, having more tools is always more useful, or can be useful. Of course, you have to be, you know, you should be aware of how you should use them. But in terms of reaction, I must say, you know, once we developed the indicator, you know, we had all kind of requests, you know, since our governor, our governor, when he was releasing the latest economic bulletin regarding Portuguese economy, you know, the highlight was this, you know, intra-monthly, this daily profile of the economy, because you can see these kind of abrupt changes that you cannot see easily looking at other sorts of indicators. So we have been, in terms of reaction, it was very well received, and you know, it is being used, of course, currently. So we include them. We are including this indicator in our current publications. We already have requests by private firms to be able to have the indicator on a more timely basis, since we release quarterly or bi-monthly publications. So, but they want more. It's not enough to know what's happening, just once a quarter, or even if So they want this kind of indicator. I think sometimes authors are more skeptical about the potential benefits than other people. But again, the people are And, of course, the current juncture helps that, but people are eager for having these high frequency indicators. But I will here say also the following, and here I will stress a bit what Halberin mentioned. Of course, in this context of pandemics, having these in high frequency indicators that are able to capture these abrupt changes can be quite useful. But I don't think that looking forward, I don't think that the usefulness is limited to that. In the following sense: first, unfortunately, the pandemics will last more than we would expect. So unfortunately, we will want you look at these kind of things for more time than we would like to. But again, and on top of that, again, it may also be useful to have these kind of things on our toolkit. So why not having these high frequency indicators, to compare, to contrast with other traditional indicators? So it's having more information typically is better, right? So or having more tools, more indicators typically is better. So the first question, the reaction, I think it was really, really positive. Regarding GDP, yeah, of course you can think of, we can develop an alternative measure of economy, but again, we need the reference variable. We need to know if these kind of variables are tracking what we feel that is reasonable. So we have to take a reference variable, and in that respect, GDP is always the reference variable because it's encompassing, it's broadly based. So of course GDP has measurement errors and there are problems with GDP, but I would say that for the time being is the best measure of the economy. So we took GDP as the reference variable, to pre-select the variables. At the end, we compare the daily economic indicator with GDP, but we are not, trying to fit it exactly to GDP. It's just to pre-select. You need to do some sort of pre-selection. Is this variable useful or not? And you need for conduct that kind of analysis, you need the reference variable. Otherwise, you're going to be lost, right? It's going to be a Bayesian approach. Is I feel that this variable is important, then I feel that you put a lot of priors on what you think that is important and what is not, and you lose a bit the metrics that I think you always need to put some statistical support to what you are doing. So taking GDP as a reference variable, I think it was an obvious choice. The question regarding how we feel on depending too much on private firms to have this data. Yeah, that's always tricky, right? We try to convince the firms that are providing this kind of data that this kind of data is really useful. So, well, I think we made a really good job convincing them that this is really useful, and everybody thanks their efforts in providing the information, and somehow they are quoted because we say electricity consumption is coming from this firm. So at the same time, you can see it as you are doing a bit of marketing of that firm if you want. So they are contributing a bit for the public goods, which I think it's important. But I must confess that, of course, there are other types of data that we eventually would like to have to exploit it when we were collecting the data. We were not able to, simply because or did have a very short sample period, and they were not able to compile a longer time series. And if you cannot compile a longer time series, then all this kind of statistical support that you should do before developing these kind of indicators is lost, and then it becomes, I feel that internet usage is quite neat because it increased a lot due to pandemics, but is that was that really useful before? Or of course, when you do this econometric stuff, you have to, of course, you may be facing structural breaks, okay, and nobody knows how to forecast structural breaks. But so the best you can do is look at the past and see if those types of data were already informative in the past, and hope that they will also be informative in the future, and not narrowing the analysis to picking those series that which we have chosen the series that have fallen the most during the pandemics. That's not really a criteria, then it will be pandemic conditional, and we don't want to do that. Okay. But hopefully, we don't have many. We are not taking on board many daily economic time series, so we don't depend on many firms, and the firms that we are depending on, we believe that they are really convinced that it's useful, and and in most cases they can provide information without much cost. They have the information. Most of the times they have the information. It's it's just you have to convince them to provide information, but they have the information. So but it can be always an issue. Your other question, regarding weekly vis-a-vis daily, we went daily, and in our case it was really simple why we went daily. I have to confess. For example, in the US case, and we know that there are these very informative weekly time series about US unemployment and stuff like that, and then they don't have them on a daily basis. In our case, we did not have that kind of trade-off, because whether we have monthly time series or we were able to collect daily time series, we don't have, again, this is conditional on the country. For Portugal, we don't have weekly time series. We don't have weekly time series. So there was no trade-off in that respect. Or we wanted high frequency, and then we could collect them on a daily basis, or we have the more traditional information that is monthly or quarterly. So in our case, there was no this kind of trade-off between weekly vis-a-vis data. So we didn't have to discard any weekly information, because simply we don't have it. We just have daily data or monthly data. So there are no weekly series being released by the National Statistics Office or by any other institution in Portugal. And of course, I think if you don't have these kind of issues, you should always go daily, simply because you can go daily. Of course, you have to cope some of the issues that I mentioned, but if you take the weekly data, you also have to take on board some of these issues. And I would say some of them are even a bit more, trickier conceptually to deal with. So, and you can always go from the daily to the weekly, or to the, to the bi-weekly or monthly. You can always, smooth out the data if you want to go to a lower frequency. So if you go to the highest frequency possible, then you are, you can always go to a lower frequency without losing anything. In our case, for example, we took the centered weekly average, but the indicator is still daily. You have, in each day, you have an indicator. Of course, it reflects a week around that day, but you still have it on a daily basis. The last question, regarding, the criteria for selecting series, the number of series. Again, when you are considering these high frequency indicators, you typically don't have much choice. I must confess. Typically, as far as I heard, I have already been in other workshops and in conferences of talking about this. Typically, you don't have 25 daily economic time series. You are very limited in what you can really use. So, in our case, we have 25. But again, we should be, and I try to stress that, but we have blocks of information, right? Imagine we have, for example, traffic. We have total, we have heavy commercial vehicles, light passenger vehicles. So, it wouldn't make much sense to have, imagine the total traffic plus the heavy, or, on women's of electricity consumption, when you have this information across different distribution grids, high voltage, medium high, medium voltage, and so on. So, you can pick the ones that have more information content. So, even in that, if you want to have this encompassing and broadly based measure, you don't have that choice either. In our case, I have to confess, we had this rank of the series, and it was kind of, obvious that we should cut at 5, because the series that, the other series had a much lower information content. It was really visible, it's the information content declined substantially when you try to take on board other series than those 5. So, of course, can be always an issue for selecting series, but in our case, and again, in our case, it was not. And in most cases, I would say, since you are dealing with high frequency indicators, you don't typically have much choice either. So you are not, you can always do this kind of robustness analysis, but you will not have to, to consider, hundreds or millions of cases, all sorts of combinations. You don't need to do that because you don't have many time series to do that either. Yeah, and I think that covers basically your issues.
Yes. Yes,
I hope that I answered and clarified a bit. This is from my personal experience. Of course, this is a learning by doing process, right? And of course, there might be other indicators coming out now that one could also consider. This is, of course, ongoing work, and there are people are trying to be innovative in terms of what information they can take on board. But again, of course, you can take on board many different types of indicators. But again, for me, this is crucial. I want, if I put something out there, I want to be at least confidence that this kind of, the indicator has some good adherence in the past regarding what I want to track. It's not, this year it fell substantially, it captures very well, internet usage. But when all this goes away, will that information be also useful in the recovery? That's always a question mark, right? Of course,
yes.
If you have structural breaks in the economy, if now people are doing more remote working, that could change things. But we are not, for example, even traffic. We are not using light passenger vehicles traffic. We are using heavy commercial vehicles traffic. So it's kind of transportation of merchandises and stuff like that. It's not, we are not capturing people going from home to work. So even if there is more remote working, it will be robust to that kind of issues. But again, we were not biased toward those indicators because of that. It just came out naturally from what I explained. We considered those series. We just assess the information content of each series individually, and it came out naturally that the heavy commercial, the road traffic of heavy commercial vehicles was had more information content than the light passenger vehicles, which is for that kind of critiques like the remote working is quite neat, right? It's like, for example, we consider card-based payments. We also consider ATM cash withdrawals. At the end, we got that it was card-based payments, which is also nice because you can buy online using your credit card, and we are capturing that effect. Or when you go to the shop and you use your debit card, we are also capturing that. So it's not like we are, withdrawing on the fact that we are waiting for people to withdraw cash and they go to the shop and spend it, because in our case we are just using card-based payments. And again, it came out naturally. But one should bear in mind, because of course, fortunately, we had this information, which is, we know that it's not available for all countries. One should bear in mind that we may be capturing specific dimensions of the economy. And we should be aware that there might be some disadvantages regarding those specific types of data. But again, all these things you should be aware of.
Yes, I think that at the end the model works quite well, and that the choice, even considering a limited number of possibilities, it was very clever. I mean, the intuitive appeal of the selected variables is evident. And besides, they work well statistically. So I think it's a great job what you have done, and you have achieved something that is quite relevant, and you have given an innovative answer to challenging times. So I guess we are all obliged to doing efforts in that direction, because these times we are living in demand innovation, demand the best of our capabilities to use the power of statistics to describe what is going on. And I think you have done it quite well. You have nailed it. And well, I am so excited of seeing what you have done, and looking forward to continue in contact with you for exchanging experiences. And I have to say that it's very impressive, and we are very happy to have you here. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and we will not be able to exchange with you further this morning. And there are some questions by the public that we will send you, and if you kindly accept to answer them, we will give the answers to each and every one of the participants. Having said that, I just want to thank you very much, and repeating that it's very exciting looking at what you have done and achieved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A todos, por favor, vamos a desconectarnos y a conectarnos para la sesión que sigue, que ya debe estar comenzando. Muchas gracias. Buen día a todos y a todas.
Dear Professor Galbraith, could you please turn into the other link? Thank you.
I'm just looking for that link now, and I will connect momentarily.